Alright, BIP Bizarre Interest Productions, and let's talk about Aiga versus Lui, because I did survive today, but mentally wasn't there until Sweet Revenge 2 managed to break me out of my depression enough to type this. And even then, I'm not sure how fast I'll get this impromptu video out. Besides, Fragrant Flower Blooms with Dignity is currently playing in the background. This isn't part of the huge plot armor video I have planned, but I figured people are still complaining about this fight to this day. And unlike some people, I actually go back and rewatch things to make sure my arguments are sound. Again, as easy as it is to just to clout chase off Beyblade, that is not what I'm here to do. And we've talked about why. And the other thing is I just hate misinformation and those spreading it. So, let's remember the context behind Aiga versus Lui's final battle in Chozetsy, aka Turbo. The WBBA announced a new upcoming tournament, the Longnius Cup, aka the Lunar Cup, in episode 6, but Aiga recruited Fubuki and Renjiro to help him fight Lui in a 3-on-1 battle royale after Aiga lost to him in the past episode. And in episode 5, their strategy had each one weaken Lui as he took them down one by one, and Aiga had managed to knock Lui's Beyblade out of the stadium, but Lui used Longnius' Bloody Squall in order to finish Aiga off. Then, while preparing for the cup, he lost to Suo, and then he lost to Hoey after meeting him. Throughout the tournament, and remember this, Aiga spent his journey from the top 8, fighting and eventually defeating every other blader who he lost to thanks to his training of taking Lui's machine with the 3 straps and adding a 4th one, using Ragnarok's Typhoon against Renjiro by diving into the Eye of the Storm, then Hoey by creating Z-Slash to defeat Archer Hercules, and then in the finals, he defeated Suo by countering his jumping attack style, then using Z-Slash to overcome Suo Salamander, winning the tournament and earning the right to fight Lui. So we're going to look at episodes 14 and 15 to determine the truth. Did Aiga have plot armor against Lui? If you made it this far, type Chozetsy burst in the comments, and let's get started. Now, for those of you who don't remember, in episode 14, Aiga actually came in with a solid plan. Whenever Longnius attacks, especially if it's about to use Dragon Scream, the metal avoids the other Beyblade's contact points to either burst them or hit them with an uppercut attack that's devastating and useful for burst finishes if the opponent is weak, but it's especially good for ring-out finishes. But there is a weakness to that strategy. Dive bomb attacks, which normally would be an effective strategy since you're using the momentum from your opponent's attacks and the force of gravity to pound from the air to fly back right to the opponent, especially since you're hitting them at the top of their Beyblade. However, there's 2 weaknesses to that strategy, one of which Lui's Beyblade is perfectly suited for. The other one is Aiga ironically managed to exploit in the final round, but let's talk about that later. See, because Longnius' layers are made up of entirely metal and are used for uppercut attacks, when Aiga attacked Lui with Z-Dive, the metal on the top of the layer was able to power through the attacks and basically cause Achilles to lose all of its momentum for the remainder of the first round and lose. Against most opponents, I would have at least given Aiga 1 point, but Lui's just built different. And by that, I mean his Beyblade is built different. So let's move on to episode 15, Trial by Fire, Defeat Lui, which, dub team, a little bit unnecessary when the original title was just Defeat Lui. Heck, technically in terms of elements, Lui's dragons have been metal or ice themed, while Aiga and Achilles at least were not possessed by the Dark Resonance. Well, I guess you could argue fire, but maybe they're lightning too? Okay, let me know in the comment section, what elements do you associate Lui and Aiga with? Anyway, for round 2, how did Aiga survive another fight with Lui and get a point off him? Well, Aiga had felt demoralized, and after a second win from Naru leading Hoey, Renjiro, and the rest of the Bay Club and Rebel Club leading the audience to cheer him on, Aiga regains his focus and matches Lui's wavelength. But this time, Aiga had changed his launch to jump airborne, increasing its speed and rotational power. While Longnius' attacks prevented Achilles from staying directly into the center, presumably to stop him from using Z-Defense, Aiga's partner was able to tank the attacks. Remember, it's a balance type, equal in attack, defense, and stamina, though I'd argue Achilles leans more towards attack/defense hybrid. The funny thing is that combination not only fits this sword and shield motive, but when Longnius goes for a finishing attack, Aiga ends up using that momentum, intentionally hitting the wall to activate Z-Buster and boost off it to finish the opponents. Remember, Z-Buster has Achilles use its height to its advantage and attacks with the blade on its layer to knock the opposing blade downward. Because Achilles had more momentum from using the wall, Z-Buster was able to push Longnius out of the stadium farther. But how? That's plot armor. Well, besides momentum, Longneus didn't have that much movement after it hit Achilles to the wall because it pushed him off while being closer to the center. The thing is, even with Longneus' heavy metal, if a force is coming out that can push you with speed and metal attached to it, the inertia would overpower the metal, especially when Longneus was at a speed disadvantage. But isn't changing your form of launch power plot armor too? I mean, not really. Volt did the same thing back in Season 1. Remember how he stopped backwards and then hopped 3 times when he fought Shaka, then went all the way to the edge of the entrance to do the same thing against Lui? The funny thing is that both Volt and Lui jumped that time too. So if those weren't plot armor, this can't be either. Even Taiga said you need to relax your body and mind to shoot strong, and Aiga saw Lui's form and unconsciously realized that on his own. Howie even pointed out Aiga can naturally pick up on his opponent's specialties, which is something we see before the battle and in future battles in Chozetsy to come. And in round 3, Aiga shot Achilles normally but with extra power, putting harm on his shoulder, but this time Dragon Scream and Z-Buster were at equal levels of speed and power, resulting in a simultaneous burst finish. But the impact gives a massive strain on his arms to the point Lui issues a timeout. Which, giving Lui hates having to lose to people that have a handicap, he actually has some level of kindness and restores, well, and offers Aiga the chance to heal. Considering that speaks a lot for Lui, that shows that unlike half of the fandom, he actually develops and changes, which is very respectful and mature of Lui. If you do want to argue anything that could be plot armor, it's that during the time Aiga goes to get medical treatment, he ends up meeting Phi, who convinces him to resonate with Achilles, and in their mental plane, it's almost as if Achilles touching him in that realm restores his hand. Given Aiga strong enough to parkour around the forest of his family and hold sheep, it's definitely possible that his hand would be able to recover quickly, but that's just an interesting analysis on that part. Nothing too major. Then we get to the 4th and final round. This time Aiga uses the jumping launch and has Achilles dodge Longneus fast enough to get to the center, and use Z-Defense to block and endure Lui's barrage attack numerous times until it's able to push Achilles out of the center. However, Aiga's able to recover before it hits the wall, racing across the outer rim to increase its speed and match Lui's blade power for power, and he eventually knocks Lui's partner in the air. However, Lui does Bloody Squall, and this time Aiga uses Z-Slash. And this is the point of contention, but I feel like people don't understand why this move worked. Earlier, remember when I said there's 2 weaknesses to dive bomb attacks? Well, the second is that an attack from above can get nullified if the opponent's Beyblade is able to strike at the burst layers. See, the energy layer has the burst mechanism underneath it, and striking that part makes it easier for the Beyblade to burst. Dive bomb attacks either go for a full 90-degree dive, but if you have a special move that's good for knocking an opponent's Beyblade off balance, but also strikes the bottom part of the layer, you're able to activate the mechanism and burst a lot easier. Pause and go back to episode 15, where Z-Slash hits Longneus at the exact point of contact, and Aiga's launch gave Achilles just enough power to pull through. And heck, this isn't even going to be the only time we see this happen, because in the final battle against Phi, Aiga did the same thing, defeating Final Dread Impact, or Final Dead Impact, by using Super Z Sword, or Chozetsy Sword, or Turbo Sword. So if mechanically the fight makes sense, why do people call this battle plot armor? Well, I think it was because it was the first arc introduced. Some people feel it was way too early in the series. Normally, I could agree with that, but given that Beyblade is a multimedia franchise and also has to coincide with the scheduled release of the IRL Beyblades, and the mangaka usually gets the order of when these things are released so that they can write the arcs, this became the first arc of the anime for Chozzy. That being said, I also feel like fans are putting it in an unfair set of circumstances, considering that the second arc is going to introduce 3 members of the Z4 in a 9-person tournament regarding the new generation. Then Free and Shu come back but don't take priority until the 3rd arc, with Volt still being the person to fight for the end of the 2nd arc. Then Aiga has to deal with Heart and Hades for the 3rd arc, then having to deal with Phi at the end for the finale. There was a lot going on in each of the 4 arcs, and if Lui had to be defeated, at the very least, the first arc was building up to Aiga eventually taking him down. Then there's also the fact it took Aiga 10 episodes to beat him. Yeah, people just like to act like Aiga easily beat him, when anyone with a brain knows that's not what happened at all. In between the time where he and Lui fought, which, remind you, is episodes 6 through 14, Aiga learned a defensive move to stop relying on his issue of treating his balance type Beyblade as only an attack type, and a new attack move that would benefit the lower heights. while also getting his butt kicked by every other blader he would eventually have to come across in a tournament beforehand. But that also gave him not only extra incentive to train, but also improve. Plus, that fight wasn't easy at all. Aiga came in with a game plan for round 1, had to switch up his launch style for round 2, strained his muscle, barely being able to pull out a draw in round 3, so hard that Lui had to request medical attention, and then in round 4, he had to take advantage of a weakness to dive bomb attacks that Lui beat him in round 1 with. Also, let's not pretend Vault did something similar back in Season 1 with his first arc, beating several rivals he lost to, having to take on Waki at least twice in order to beat him properly to reach the finals. The only difference is that Aiga's competition and caliber was much higher. Fubuki and Suo both were champions of the team tournament, and Howie almost defeated Vault, but I guess context doesn't matter. To make a long, complicated story short, no, he didn't have plot armor, and people are just upset Lui lost. If you disagree, be civil in the comments and explain to me why I'm wrong. If you agree, give me all your thoughts. Heck, tell me what you thought about the final battle. Anyway, I need to get this recorded, so BIP of Bizarre Interest Productions. Thanks for watching, and signing off.